You are listening to Catholic Family Podcast.
Greetings, my friends in Christ. This is Dan Davis with a Catholic Family Podcast video essay, The Seeds of Rebirth. Recently, my wife Lisa and I took a trip to Denver, Colorado to see Lisa's ailing mother. Please pray for the repose of the soul of Susan Chenoweth, a true pioneer of the traditional Catholic movement who passed away shortly after our visit. It was a 3-night trip, and money being tight, we decided to stay in a cheap hotel, a national chain in a once nice part of town. We arrived on Wednesday night, and the place was, shall we say, scary. Hoodlum-looking teens outside, people walking dogs, big, scary dogs, and there were hints of drug addiction throughout the building. Many there appeared to be in one way or another, and for lack of a better word, broken. Broken physically, broken mentally, and broken spiritually. We checked in and found our way to our third-floor room. There was no refrigerator, which honestly was no surprise in a hotel in this price range, and we had some perishable food with us, so I took to the task of finding an ice machine. There was a vending room on the third floor, which required keyed entry for some strange reason, and included only a pop machine and, hey, an ice machine, which was out of order. So I tried the second floor. But the vending room on that floor was just a laundry area, so I tried the first floor. As I walked down the stairs to the first floor, a young girl was walking up to the second floor. Naturally attractive, life seemed to have worn heavily on her countenance. She was wearing obnoxious pajamas, but it was her hair that really stood out. A huge, fluffy abomination that was held in place over her head by what looked like a giant hairnet. I thought to myself that without the hairnet, she might look like Medusa. As we passed, we caught each other's eyes. She looked at me, smiled, and said gently and genuinely, "Hi." I said hi back, and we moved on. No underlying agenda, no expectations, just hi. It was a moment that touched my heart, and I immediately retracted the thought about Medusa. But it was a scene that would play out again and again over the next several days. Folks consistently calling us sir and ma'am. A rough-looking front desk clerk cheerfully fetching an extra pillow for us from a closet behind the counter. A tough, young Hispanic man, a solid 6'2", with tattoos on his arms and headed outside for a cigarette, holding the back door open for us while we were still 20 feet away from the building. On Friday night, we were returning from seeing Susan and got on the hotel's elevator. The stairs were a long hike away and we were tired. As the elevator opened on the first floor, a broken-looking older man got on ahead of us and pushed the buttons for both the second and third floors. Why? I'm not really sure. He seemed like a gentle enough guy, probably confused, and I didn't have the nerve to ask, and we were in no hurry. As we stopped in the second floor, another man was waiting to get on. He jolted a little when he saw a full elevator. He was a small man of about 5'6" or so, with an uncanny facial resemblance to the rapper Snoop Dogg. His head was shaved about 4 or 5 days prior, but he had one full tuft of hair on the back of his head, which was home-based to a 6-inch ponytail. "Are you going down?" I asked. "I'm afraid we're going up." He moved slightly forward, then back, then forward, then back, then finally made up his mind and got on the elevator. "There's only one elevator," he smiled. "I might as well." And then he said something entirely unexpected. "Besides, it's always nicer to ride on an elevator when you can ride with somebody." Before I could even digest what he had just said, the elevator stopped on the third floor. He jumped out, enthusiastically grabbed the door into the third floor hallway, and said, "You both have a wonderful evening." I said something equally cordial, reached for my room's key card, and nearly broke down crying at the humble beauty of it all. The next morning, we were headed back to Omaha and were able to see Denver proper in the daylight for the first time on this trip. It was not the Denver that we lived in for the first half of our married lives. When Lisa had moved to Denver in the late 1970s, a number of the major roadways on the outskirts of town had not even been paved yet. It was not uncommon to see people riding on horseback or even driving cattle through town. When I moved to Denver in 1984, the mayor at the time, Federico Pena, was still recovering from a political mess from having tried to use trash trucks for snow removal and getting them stuck all over town. John Elway was in his second year as quarterback of the Broncos, and Denver still felt somehow young and innocent. No, today's Denver was a very different Denver. People everywhere, lots of upscale apartments, light rail connecting all the key parts of town. It was modern, high-tech, and dirty, with trash and bums everywhere. The Aurora Center, where we had done much of our shopping for many years, was blighted and trashy. Denver, which had worked so hard to shed its cowtown image of the 1980s, ultimately accomplished it by selling its soul to modernism and pot money. The resulting rot is ubiquitous and inescapable. As I said to Lisa, it looked like Denver had reached a tipping point sometime after we left, to where the people who don't care now outnumber the people who do. But despite the decay of the place we once proudly called home, or perhaps because of it, I learned some amazing lessons on this trip, the most important of which, I believe, involved God's grace. Modern man has asked God to remove himself from the public square, and in the words of the great Paul Harvey, God, being the gentleman he is, has honored the request. Without God's active presence, and perhaps more importantly, without the perpetual sacrifice and the grace of the true sacraments, neither Denver, nor Paris, nor New York, nor even Rome herself stand a chance against the wiles of the enemy. Now, I've long held that when God removes his loving hand from a society, he continues nonetheless to maintain his grace and his presence with individuals. This trip to Denver forced me to rethink that premise to an extent and consider the possibility that when God removes his loving hand from society, he actually increases his grace with individuals, not the proud or the worldly or those who sought to remove him to begin with, but with his own, those in the state of sanctifying grace, and also with the simple, the humble, the damaged, and the weak. God works with that kind of intricacy. As Jesus increased, St. John the Baptist decreased. As Rome fell, St. Gregor the Great rose. As epochs of history so frequently end with man turning his back on God, God starts to build a new one in which man can reorient himself back to God's social kingship. The two cycles often overlap, like Noah building the ark. Have you ever noticed that in the month of February, when winter is at its coldest and most miserable, the days are getting longer? It's because even as God mires us with the brutality of the dead of winter, he is also putting in motion the glory of spring. The divine cadence is perfect. And as surely as dawn follows the dark of night, the calm follows the storm, and resurrection follows the passion, the rebirth of a new society always follows the decay and death of the old. Friends, our world is dying. Sins of its impending death are baked into pretty much every news story of 2022. But personally, I also see the seeds of rebirth all around us. I see them in the heroic weekend mass circuits of our traditional Catholic priests. I see them in the unfailing persistence of fathers and mothers of large Catholic families, fighting to make ends meet and raise virtuous Catholic children in a world that is morally, spiritually, and financially stacked against them. I see them in our filled-to-capacity seminaries and convents and their world-class choirs. I see them in the daily conversions of Novus Ordo Catholics who are finding liberation in the truth and completely unyoking from George Bergoglio. And I see them in the damaged souls of Denver, Colorado, where poverty, vice, and hopelessness reign supreme, but the light of God's grace, his charity, and mankind's intrinsic desire for goodness can never be completely extinguished. That light still shines. I've seen it. Maybe these broken souls are not as broken as we'd like to think. Maybe mankind is not as broken as we'd like to think. Maybe God's church is not as broken as we'd like to think. Maybe God is allowing the old, tired, debauched world as we knew it to burn to the ground because it took him for granted. But what if he's already prepared the green shoots of rebirth, and the nitrogen from the consuming fire of the wicked will be what helps those green shoots to grow into a new Catholic spiritual, political, and economic ecosystem? His ways are not our ways. He's done it before. The road ahead will not be easy, and will be filled with physical privations. You can count on that. But what we know for certain is that no matter the chaos, no matter the confusion, no matter the hardship, no matter the apparently random nature of events, God is in complete control, as he always has been and always will be, world without end. And as he has allowed the crisis of today, so has he also created the solution for tomorrow. Our duty is to sanctify today Soldier on despite the overwhelming odds on the battlefield and wait for that solution to unfold. Whether that solution is for us, or for our children, or for our children's children, we will all marvel at its magnificence, its fulfillment of prophecy, and its divine poetry. Because with God, history, His story, will always end in perfect harmony.